Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Cam, how are you?
I'm fabulous. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome.
On this nice, cold, rainy October morning.
My favorite ever in the history of
turned
ever.
On the heat. Yep, it's nice.
I do. So
it's nice.
I heard you have a nice story for us.
It's not nice, but yeah, this. There's so many emotions in this. I can't even begin to tell you.
Okay, well,
it makes me really sad. It makes me very angry.
Ooh.
So,
all right, buckle up. I guess we have to put
ready?
our seatbelts on. We gotta go.
Ready?
Yep.
All right. On February 1st, 1993, a minister was summoned to a house off of Dimboola Road in the outback town of Antwerp, Australia. When he arrived, he was greeted by a man named David Klingner, who said, "It's a long story," as he led the pastor into the house.
Oh.
Inside, the minister was overcome by a foul stench. Blowflies were buzzing around the house, attracted to the putrid smell of decay. Outside, temperatures had reached 40 degrees Celsius, or 104 degrees Fahrenheit, for several days, increasing the decomposition rate. The minister was pretty confident that whoever they had called him for was beyond saving. I mean, after all, he was a man of the cloth, not God himself. He made his way past a group of people who were calmly eating their lunch at the kitchen table, into a bedroom where the swollen remains of 49-year-old Joan Vollmer lay fully dressed on a mattress stained with the secretions that occurred naturally with decomposition. The minister immediately phoned the police, and a constable was sent to the house. When Constable Michael Arnott arrived, he spoke to the dead woman's husband, 54-year-old pig farmer Ralph Vollmer. After just a few moments, the constable understood the situation as thus. Ralph's wife had been possessed by 10 different demons, and she had died as a result of her deliverance, otherwise known as an exorcism. The constable took in the scene. Joan Vollmer had been dead for 2 or 3 days at least. The next logical question was why it took Ralph so long to call the police, and the events leading up to this moment made for a very long and strange story. Halfway between Adelaide and Melbourne, Australia, lies the community of Antwerp. Now, it's not really a town anymore since only a few houses remain, and the post office closed 3 decades ago. With a population of just 63 in 2016, the Antwerp Tennis Club is the only place to go for excitement. The grain facilities are no longer used, and the railway siding is only used to store surplus grain wagons. In every direction, Antwerp is surrounded by very flat, dry farmlands. It is the place where the temperate climate gives way to the arid environment, and the site where the disturbing and tragic death of Joan Vollmer occurred. Joan Lenora Taylor was born in October of 1943. Joan was sexually abused as a child and diagnosed with schizophrenia. She was hospitalized for her mental illness several times, and the experiences left her fearing hospitals and psychiatric medicine. Joan often struggled to fit in, and when her first husband took his own life, she was racked with guilt and anxiety. And she was just a tiny little petite, dark-headed woman. In 1986, Joan met Ralph Vollmer, and her life improved. Ralph Vollmer was born in 1938 in Germany, and like thousands of other European families, the Vollmers immigrated to Australia after World War II to get away from the death and destruction of the war. Ralph was just a teen, and once he settled in Australia, he never returned to school to complete his education. He only had a primary education. Ralph worked on farms and did odd jobs. He did marry and had a couple of sons, but the marriage didn't last, and the couple divorced in the mid-1970s. In 1988, Ralph and Joan bought a farm and moved to Antwerp, and just the little speck on an outback map. The house and farm sat at the end of a long driveway, about 1.5 football fields in length. The house was single-story with a wide porch, and even though it was a reasonably dry region, their property backed up to the Wimmera River, and Joan managed to coax a beautiful garden from the red soil. Her abundant flowers bordered the house, giving it a cozy, well-loved appearance. The couple joined Horsham Salvation Army Church a little later. Neither had been particularly religious before meeting, but Ralph had always been highly interested in devout people. After they became a member of the church, Ralph was the one who truly embraced it. He could often be found listening to Christian music and marking up his Bible with a yellow highlighter, while Joan would tend to her garden and watch television. Ralph was always eager to engage with other, more biblically knowledgeable individuals than he was. In his kitchen, he hung a plaque that read, "Christ is the head of this house, the unseen guest at every meal, the silent listener to every conversation." And on the stove hung a photo of him and Joan. But the paradise that the couple had found together was soon shattered. In the spring of 1991, Joan Vollmer began to exhibit signs of hypomania, which terrified Ralph. Now, according to the Psych Central website, the symptoms of hypomania are as follows. 1, elevated self-esteem, high self-confidence, feelings of grandiosity. They need less sleep, like they feel rested only after 3 hours of sleep. Mm-hmm. They're more talkative than usual, or they feel pressure to keep talking. They have racing thoughts, or they quickly change ideas. They're easily distracted. Let's see, what else? Doing many activities at once, such as they work tasks, organizing social events or seemingly purposeless movements, and engaging in activities that may lead to harmful consequences, such as excessive spending, dangerous driving, or risky financial investments. However, the website is also quick to point out that most of the time, these symptoms are mild enough that they don't hinder a person's daily life. A bout of depression usually follows a hypomanic episode, and it's a common part of bipolar disorder. And it's weird because sometimes it's called hypomania, but it's hypo, but everything is hypomania that we found. I don't know. It's weird. During this episode, Joan became fixated on her childhood. She talked about it frequently. And for the most part, Joan seemed oblivious that anything was wrong with her or that she was behaving unusually. When she told her husband that she'd done a painting for them, it turned out that she had actually painted his entire car with house paint.
Oh.
Ralph grew increasingly worried that there were evil forces at work. When she was overcome with rage and her eyes, quote, turned red, Ralph became so afraid that he locked himself in the house. And incidentally, yes, eyes can turn red and appear to glow from increased adrenaline and blood flow. So.
Oh, I did not know that.
Just FYI. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen red before, like literally seen red.
Really?
So, I was working in retail. Go figure. Anyway, sorry. Ralph sought help from his church elders, who rejected the idea that Joan was possessed or that there was any evil forces at work. They instead offered the couple counseling, which Ralph rejected. After a visit with a general practitioner, they suggested that Joan be admitted as an involuntary patient to a mental health care facility. There, she was medicated, and her sleep pattern slowly improved. When Joan was released from the hospital, she had not entirely recovered from her episode. The doctor prescribed her an antipsychotic and told her that she needed to take the medicine for at least a year. She and Ralph were warned that she would likely have a recurring episode within 2 years if she didn't stay on her medications or continue psychological treatment. And Joan did not follow up with any mental health care appointments. Ralph felt that the doctors really didn't help his wife enough. Not willing to give the medications time to balance Joan's brain chemistry or follow up with any prescribed counseling, Ralph consulted some friends, John and Leanne Reichenbach, who practiced a more charismatic approach to their Christianity. They suggested that Joan undergo a deliverance, which is like an exorcism, where the soul is cleaned from its evil entities. Joan refused, and since she refused, Ralph's friends suggested that he pray to God to bind the evil spirits. Ralph prayed, and when his wife's condition got better, most likely because the medication was starting to level out her brain chemistry, Ralph took it as a sign that she had honestly been possessed and that the prayer had worked. Joan, having PTSD from her previous stints with mental health care professionals, needed little to no encouragement to stop taking her medication. The Reichenbachs, age 30 at the time, had been kicked out of their Lutheran church for their charismatic approach to religion. Their minister had pointed out that some of the things they believed in or practiced went against the Bible's teachings. He reasoned that the charismatic movement accepts, quote, extra biblical messages, and Deuteronomy 4:2 clearly states that it is unacceptable. Now, those that don't know Bible, the Deuteronomy 4:2 basically says that we, the people, are forbidden from adding or subtracting from the scriptures. Like, we can't replace the word of God with our own words.
Yeah,
right?
so you can't make it fit your...
You can't just make things up
There you go.
and
Yeah.
teach, right? Yeah. There are over 500 million practitioners of charismatic Christianity worldwide. Now, they believe they are endowed with supernatural abilities bestowed upon them by the Holy Spirit, such as speaking in tongues, healing, and the gift of prophecy. Charisma means a divinely conferred power, gift, grace, or talent, depending on which dictionary you look at. When the Reichenbachs were excommunicated, they began holding prayer services at home. This is where Ralph Vollmer's beliefs took a more fanatical flavor. In January of 1993, Ralph and Joan Vollmer attended a 6-day-long religious convention 4.5 hours away in Adelaide. While Joan attended church regularly, she was not as devout as her husband, but she agreed to accompany Ralph on the trip. The event was full of miracles, preaching, and singing, and casting out demons was high on the list of miracles performed that week. Shortly after they arrived home, Joan's troubles returned. She had stopped taking her medications and, as the doctors had predicted, Joan suffered another psychological episode. Once again, Joan had difficulty concentrating on tasks, difficulty sleeping, was extremely restless, and would change her clothes several times a day. According to her husband, as time passed, Joan began speaking in several different accents and adopting different identities, everything from a sheep shearer to a sex worker. Ralph was convinced that spending a week at the religious convention had somehow unsettled or angered the demons he had bound in his wife 2 years earlier. And as we know, Ralph believed in demons, so that's what he saw. He saw demons. On January 22nd, Ralph Vollmer returned home to find Joan waving her arms, dancing around in their paddocks, and swearing at people that only she could see. She snorted like a pig, made other animal noises, and eventually ran away from the house, and then she was found several miles away. Calling a doctor didn't seem to occur to Ralph, so he did the only thing that he could do. He prayed. He prayed for guidance, and the Lord told him to call the Reichenbachs. John Reichenbach arrived just before midnight on January 22nd and deduced that the demons possessed Joan. He and his wife had performed over 20 deliverances, and his expert opinion was that they must start the process immediately. Ralph and his friend John stayed awake all night long, praying and reading Bible passages. Leanne Reichenbach arrived the following day and took over for her husband John so he could return home to care for their children. Leanne immediately called Leah Klungston, aged 77, to ask for guidance. They considered her a spiritual leader in their community because she claimed to speak directly to God. Somehow, Leah deduced over the phone, without ever having met Joan, that 10 demonic entities possessed Joan. Following the advice of Leah, Ralph and Leanne sat Joan on a chair in the kitchen while they sat on the other side asking her questions, praying, and playing Christian music on the stereo. This continued nonstop for the next 2 days. Sometimes John would give Ralph and Leanne a break, but somebody always prayed over Joan. Their sessions would go from noon to almost 5 in the morning, and after 3 days, Joan's condition still had not improved, and they decided they needed reinforcements. So they called on 28-year-old David Klingner. David was a group prayer circle member and had seen the Vollmers at a New Year's Eve gathering just a few weeks before. Now, he suspected then that Joan was spiritually compromised due to a blank expression on her face. David felt it was his duty to assist in the deliverance. He arrived on Tuesday, January 26th, and he said he could sense the battle between good and evil on the property. The three of them, Ralph, David, and Leanne, continued their vigil until the next day, the whole time checking in with other members of their prayer circle via phone. On January 28th, Ralph was growing tired of his wife's resistance and having to run after her and drag her back to her chair when she would try to run away. So he decided it best to tie Joan to wooden planks so she would quit moving around and making, quote, satanic gestures. The others agreed. As time went on, Joan became more verbally abusive and angry. Again, the group saw this as evil spirits fighting for control of Joan's soul, when in reality she was thirsty, starving, exhausted, being held against her will, slapped over and over, and suffering from psychosis, probably made worse after their treatment of her. I mean, who wouldn't be verbally abusive and angry in that situation? Just my thoughts.
No, totally. I mean...
When he noticed the bruises forming on his wife's skin, Ralph Vollmer seemed to have a moment of doubt. He said that this could not possibly be God's will. Leanne and David assured Ralph that this wasn't his wife being harmed, but a demonic presence, and insisted that Joan wasn't being hurt in any way. The three of them, Ralph, Leanne, and David, were at a loss as to why Joan's condition didn't improve. Why were their prayers not working? Leah told the group in one of their many phone sessions that they needed to call for more reinforcements. Leah had spoken to many of their prayer members during the days of Joan's exorcism. One of them, Kathleen Nuske, one source says Catherine is the name, not Kathleen, suggested her 22-year-old son, Matthew Nuske, could come help.
How many people did they need to get in on this?
Enough. Matthew Nuske lived about 250 miles away in a suburb of Melbourne. He was described as, quote, particularly sensitive to the message of God, because he had previously detected demons in the house that he lived in. Kathleen also said that God was training Matthew to be an exorcist. She also claimed that she had anointed her son by laying hands on him and prayed to the Lord to use Matthew as his earthly vessel. Saturday, January 30th, was a scorching hot and dry day. Joan had been deprived of food and water for days at this point. Matthew Nuske arrived and knew immediately that the demons within Joan were afraid of him. Unable to make eye contact with him, Joan's eyes rolled into the back of her head. Matthew Nuske said he had received the word of God to use a piece of glad wrap, yes, that's right, the stuff that keeps leftovers fresh, to protect the house from evil spirits. God instructed him of this on his drive down, that he was to run around the house 7 times with the glad wrap, just a piece, like a little 12-inch piece, to create a sort of shield that I guess kind of sealed the doors and windows, so it would keep the demons at bay.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I haven't either. Ralph and David then used hammers to smash some of Joan's favorite possessions, like kitten figurines and jewelry, and then they tore up the garden she so lovingly created and cared for, and this was to cause a distraction to any demons lying in wait. Everyone in attendance anointed themselves with olive oil, and the torment of Joan Vollmer was increased.
Why would they break her little figurines? If that's something she likes.
That's what demons lived in. Demons, like her greenhouse. That's where the whole start of the demon possession was, the greenhouse, which she loved and she always spent her time in.
I don't know about that.
The group began pushing Joan's stomach and chest to get the demons out. Actually, the group held her down, and Leanne was the one that she would put, she said a mild pressure, but would put pressure on her stomach, and then it would go up to her chest, and then it would go to her throat, and then her tongue. This was to get the demons out. And then David stood behind her and held Joan's eyes open with his thumbs so that Joan would have to look at Matthew and see the presence of Jesus. Her mouth was held open so the demons could find their way out. Joan was hit in the face over 20 times. And, quote, in the precious name of Jesus, Matthew would drone over and over. Some of the demons inside Joan's were, quote, identified and given names by the group. According to Matthew, one was no less the infamous Legion, the one who Jesus cast out of a possessed man in the New Testament, and is the entity that appears in Mark 5:6-9. The, quote, my name is Legion entity is actually many demons rolled up into one, but is often referred to in a singular identification. Like the movie The Exorcist, we are Legion.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
They claimed other demons within Joan were baby Princess Joni, who detailed the sexual abuse she had suffered as a child. After a while, the group felt as though baby Princess Joni, a demon that resembled a pig and one who was a dog, had been successfully driven out of Joan's body. However, they firmly believed that the unidentified male and the infamous Legion were still hanging on tight, refusing to leave Joan's womb. That's right, her womb, her uterus.
Mm-hmm.
According to Ralph, during the torturous questioning, Joan revealed that her parents had sacrificed 2 of their children to Satan and that Joan's life had been dedicated to him through a satanic baptism. After that, she became known as Baby Princess Joan to those who worshipped Satan. Joan Vollmer's family would later deny this accusation. People were quick to point out that it's possible by this stage in the deliverance that Joan was not only hallucinating from lack of food, water, and, it was very hot, but like most people who are held captive against their will, was just telling them what she thought they wanted to hear, so they would just let her go, or at least give her some water. At around 4 p.m, Joan was moved to her bedroom. Once on the bed, the group took turns sitting on her and pushing on her chest and neck and head to get those demons out. The group massaged her stomach, then her chest, and when they got to her neck, Joan shuddered, hissed, groaned, and frothed at the mouth just before her body went limp. Matthew, Ralph, David, and Leanne sighed in relief. The evil spirits had finally been banished. But Ralph noticed shortly after that his wife wasn't breathing, and in a mild panic, the group members administered CPR, but to no avail. Joan didn't wake up. Matthew Nuske, who had never performed a deliverance or an exorcism before, assured everybody that not breathing and lack of pulse was expected after an exorcism. Joan would return to life after a few moments. He consulted with Leah Clugston by phone and then announced to Ralph, Leanne, and David that as long as they prayed over her, Joan would wake up the next day, right as rain, in perfect health. Then, Matthew immediately left the property. The next morning, Joan Vollmer was still dead. Leanne called Matthew's mother, Kathleen, and their spiritual leader, Leanne Clugston, with the news that Joanne had not arisen as promised. Both women drove to the property to lay hands on Joan and command her to get up and walk. Again, Joan remained still. Leah went home while Ralph, David, Leanne, and Kathleen stayed behind to keep praying. The following day, on the 31st, Leah contacted the group at the farm and told them that she had received a message from God that they should call the authorities. Now, one can only imagine the look on the constable's face when the group finished telling him this story. Joan Vollmer had been allowed to lie in the state of decomposition in her room while they all ate their lunch because they believed she would defy death and get up and walk around as though she was not decomposing right in front of their eyes. Ralph told the constable that he was about to witness, quote, the greatest miracle, and that's when the constable called the homicide squad. While Ralph, David, and Leanne were being formally questioned, the post-mortem on Joan revealed that the thyroid cartilage on Joan's neck had been fractured, causing Joan to have a cardiac arrest. The coroner believed that this was a direct result of the pressure the exorcist had placed on Joan's neck. Ralph Vollmer denied that the group's actions caused these injuries. He believed these injuries were caused by the demons, quote, hanging on to her internal organs. When the police asked Ralph how he could inflict that kind of punishment onto his wife, Ralph responded that he would never hurt his wife. Quote, it would have hurt my wife terribly, but it wasn't my wife. She was an evil spirit that needed to be dealt with. Ralph maintained his belief that God would, quote, do a complete resurrection job on Joan during the days leading to her funeral. He even invited the press to come and witness the miracle. On February 5th, I'm sorry.
Did they? Did press actually show up?
The press was all over this.
Of course they were. That's what I thought. Okay.
Mm-hmm. On February 5th, 1993, Joan Lenora Vollmer's funeral was held at the Salvation Army Hall in Horsham, attended by journalists, police, and friends. Joan's family was too distraught by the situation to be present at the funeral. Journalists and spectators gathered at the Horsham Cemetery to witness the miracle that Ralph had predicted. When Joan's casket was lowered into the grave, Ralph waited a moment, and when it was evident that God was not going to do the, quote, resurrection job on his beloved wife, he began to sob. After the funeral, he theorized that maybe Joan didn't want to return to life because she loved heaven so much. 3 months after Joan's death, Ralph, David Klingner, Leanne Reichenbach, and Matthew Nuske were all charged with manslaughter. All 4 were ordered to attend a 3-day committal hearing to Horsham Magistrates Court. The pathologist testified that although he felt strongly the actions of the four contributed to Joan's death, there was no way to prove that Joan's injuries resulted from the exorcism or if the damage caused her heart attack. And so the magistrate declared that although the four defendants had probably contributed to Joan's death, he decided to drop all the charges. Quote, I find that prosecution had not produced enough evidence for the jury to find that the cardiac arrest was caused by the pressure placed on the neck of the deceased. For some, though, they felt that even if the massaging of her neck had not caused her to have a heart attack, maybe being deprived of proper sleep, food, and water, plus being slapped and held down, was enough to cause a cardiac arrest. But the time for arguments had ended, and Ralph, David, Matthew, and Leanne all walked out of the courtroom free people. All four defendants felt vindicated, and Ralph Vollmer told the press, quote, God's will has been done. In October of 1994, the four defendants again found themselves in court when the Victorian Director of Public Prosecutions filed charges against them, this time on charges of manslaughter, reckless endangerment, and unlawful imprisonment. The charges were confined to the actions committed between noon and 4:30 on the day Joan died. Expert witnesses testified that mainstream Christianity did not sanction the behavior of the four defendants. Furthermore, the number of church-sanctioned exorcisms had declined sharply in the later half of the 20th century because of a better understanding of mental illnesses. They stated that many past exorcisms were wrongfully identified as demon possessions when they were individuals with mental illnesses. Mm-hmm. The expert also went on to state that an exorcism never involved violence or abuse on the part of the exorcist. And it is important to note that exorcisms per se are not against the law in Australia. But the prosecutors also added that the law does not allow excesses in the name of religion, and the extremists must be held accountable for their actions. For the most part, the group of four claimed that they knew what they were doing was God's will because God gave them confirmation. A psychologist testified that even after Joan's casket had been lowered into the ground, her husband Ralph had not entirely accepted that she wouldn't return, and it took him almost a year to realize that Joan wouldn't get resurrected.
He thought she was going to come back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ralph Vollmer was found guilty of recklessly causing serious injury and false imprisonment and given a suspended sentence. He served no jail time. Leanne Reichenbach was found guilty of manslaughter and false imprisonment. She was sentenced to 2 years with a suspended sentence and only served 4 months. David Klingner was found guilty of manslaughter and false imprisonment. He was sentenced to 18 months with a suspended sentence and only served 3 months. Matthew Nuske was convicted of false imprisonment, sentenced to 3 months with a suspended sentence, and saw no jail time. David Klingner and Leanne Reichenbach appealed their convictions to the Supreme Court, and the convictions were upheld. The members of the Australian community where the deliverance or exorcism took place were outraged by the leniency given to these 4 exorcists. While it was absolutely true that none of the 4 began the exorcism intending to harm Joan, it terrified her neighbors that anybody in any time could just look at a person who had a, quote, blank expression, claim they were possessed, and then hold them against their will for a solid week. The community in general was appalled that after withholding food and water and subjecting Joan to psychological torture, Ralph, Leanne, Matthew, and David were basically given a slap on the wrists. The group claimed that one of the ways they knew Joan was possessed was because she knew things that she wouldn't have known otherwise. When Matthew Nuske walked into the house, Joan uttered 22 and then piss pot. She had been muttering absolute gibberish for days, but somehow Matthew took this to mean that she knew his age and knew that he once had a drinking problem, when it's possible that her mutterings might not have been about him at all, which I'm going to go with that one.
Well, I was thinking, too, they could have, the adults, the exorcisers, could have mentioned that in her state. Like, that's kind of what, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like she looked at Matthew, said his full name, address, and occupation, and then recited his family tree. I mean, it could have been, she could have muttered any words, and you can associate anything with, she must be talking about me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
For many in the community, a kind and gentle woman was murdered on January 30th, whether that had been the intention or not. After all, if Ralph Vollmer had simply called an ambulance for his wife that day instead of the Reichenbachs, Joan wouldn't have died on January 30th. After Joan's funeral, Ralph Vollmer said, quote, "We are human and we do make mistakes. And sometimes we mistake God's voice for our own." This enraged me because of they got away with murdering. It got out of hand.
Well,
but it also, I feel so sad for Ralph because he truly in his heart believed all this.
Mm-hmm. But did he? I said too that if you really thought you could get away with killing your spouse,
no, he still grieves about it. He still grieves.
But I'm saying other people that would listen to this and then they would get that idea. Like, wow.
I don't know.
I would hope not.
I read an article that was, I guess he's 85 years old now or somewhere around there. And he does realize that, I mean, he kind of now blames the hospital for not keeping her as long as they should.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing is just so sad. It enrages me that it got that far. Maybe it was a mob mentality. Mm-hmm. It was a belief system, and nobody, I can't.
It's sad.
Like, he loved her. Like, he honestly loved her. He was doing nothing malicious to her. He really thought he wasn't hurting her.
Mm-hmm.
He was told he wasn't hurting her. And they all believed it too. It was just...
It's awful.
Yeah.
It's what happens when you get a group of people and...
mob mentality,
kind of
fanaticalism.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's an awful way.
Horrible.
I'm sure she was rambling on and saying incoherent things.
She was hot. She was starving. She was dehydrated. Like, she was tied down. They tied her down the entire time.
Brutal.
There is a movie based on this event. It's called Godless, The Eastfield Exorcism. Oh. And it's on Tubi here in the States.
Did you watch it?
I did watch it.
And?
I wouldn't say it's a great movie. It's pretty much, it follows it. I mean, there's a lot of things that...
And the name of it's what again?
Are similar. It's called Godless, Godless, The Eastfield Exorcism.
It's an interesting title for that.
Yeah. But it's just... And I mean, how telling was it that, like, after the whole thing was over and Matthew, the exorcist, called Leah, he just, like, said, yeah, give it a couple days and, pray. And then he just left. Like, he walked out.
Because he probably knew. He knew that he messed up.
Maybe it realized. And the kid, he was young.
Mm-hmm.
20.
Yeah.
In his 20s, early 20s. Just the whole thing is enraging. And I have so many emotions. I just can't. Mm-hmm. And the whole cling wrap, running around the house with cling wrap.
Now, salt, on the ghost shows I watch, you do the salt around the house.
More witchy. Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Just the whole and I've read some people said that on the way there, he called everybody and said, get me saran wrap. And so they had a bunch of saran wrap where they were actually wrapping the house
and that
with
was
saran wrap.
The exorcist inside the house or the demon in the house? Or was it? It was
to keep them at bay so they couldn't go in. But actually what it was he actually took one piece, like one 12 by 12 maybe piece of saran wrap,
put it on the
cling wrap
piece of the house.
He ran around with it 7 times.
Huh.
Which doesn't make any sense.
Well, it would.
Like I said, does it keep your demons fresh? Does it keep... I don't know. I mean, it's cling wrap.
Well, I guess it would keep the doors shut, but last time
But not with a 12...
I don't think a demon necessarily takes the front
30
door.
30 centimeters? Yeah.
I don't know. That's just...
It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, but
definitely
it made sense to them. So... It's enraging, and it's so sad.
It really is sad.
It is, because Ralph truly believed with all of his heart that she was going to come back. And then when she didn't, he just said that she didn't want to come back because it was too beautiful in heaven.
It was easier for him to handle that thought.
So.
Oh, buddy. That's tough. Well,
yeah.
I had never heard of that story, by the way.
Yeah.
Not that I live in Australia, but...
I actually how I found this is I was looking up another Joan Vollmer, and this came up, but Joan Vollmer was William S. Burroughs' wife, who I believe he shot, and that's how I came across this, and this was more interesting to me.
That's kind of...
Not that...
No, I know what you mean.
The other one, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know what you're saying.
But yeah, this is a case. And then if you want more of this, I know Casey from Case Files covered it. I listened to him say this. It's where I got most of my how to pronounce words and names from. I love Casey. I can listen to that Australian accent the whole time. But he does this case too. And as you know, he's got the staff to really research and do all.
You
So
mean
it's a good episode.
You didn't ask our staff to research this for you, Jen?
Our staff did research this, and she did an amazing job.
One of many.
Oh, one of our staffs.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, obviously. And then we have quality control. We have the people that listen to it.
Uh-huh.
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, good job,
So,
Jen. That's
one day.
something.
It's something.
It is something.
But like even the townspeople were just like, what? So now I can just kill anybody and
See, that's
just
what
say
I was
that
saying.
it was. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
That's exactly what they said too. That it was God told me to do it, or yeah.
I mean, I believe in their hearts they thought they were doing the right thing.
I believe in their hearts they
but
believe that
still,
too.
They still should have got
Or most of them believed
more
that anyway.
punishment, I think.
Yeah, it's tricky.
It's tricky, but it's kind of like.
I know. And poor Joan's family. I mean, they didn't even get to attend her funeral. It became a media circus.
Yeah, because
and then they were blamed. That her parents were blamed for killing babies and baptizing Joan into the satanic cult. And yeah, when that's not true, it just.
And Ralph was the more religious person, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Joan kind of went with him because she was his wife. She went to please him. I mean, I think she was religious.
But just not as religious.
But like he was the one that would pore over his Bible and highlight things. Yeah. And he was the one that always wanted to go to church. She would watch TV and go in the garden when he would sit in the table and talk religion and listen to Christian music. And he delved into it deeply, where she did. Yeah. She was religious, but not, fanatical.
Well, you did a good job.
It, maybe.
Yeah.
It's a very sad story.
I hear
infuriating.
In other news, we have an amazing
promo. Yes.
To profile.
One of our bestest buddies in the world, Edward October, with OctoberPod VHS. We have a promo. He's got his Halloween episode coming out, and it's going to be good. Comes out the 24th, which is this coming Tuesday. So the man's got a voice. I'm telling you.
Tuesday's not the 24th because Monday.
When this episode comes out, it'll be the Tuesday, the 24th.
Oh, sorry. You're right.
I know tomorrow, actually, from this recording, is your birthday.
It is.
So happy early and late birthday.
Thank you.
All in one.
It's like you forgot because this is the 24th or whatever. Just kidding. That was a good one. Woohoo. All right.
I know. It's something, isn't it?
It's really unbelievable, to tell you the truth. All right. Well, I guess I will see you the next time. Same bat time, same bat channel. And until then, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.
This Halloween, OctoberPod has the double for your toil and trouble. Tune in to OctoberPod AM, wherever you get podcasts, on October 24th to hear The Spirit God, a spooktacular new audio drama starring your favorite indie podcasters, and written by maniacs. Then on Halloween Day, visit OctoberPod Home Video on YouTube, where Edward October will be telling Halloween bedtime stories. A family-friendly special that's perfect for getting your children of the night off to sleep. Yes, it's double the Halloween fright and double the Halloween fun when you listen to OctoberPod AM's presentation of The Spirit Doll on October 24th, wherever you get podcasts. And watch OctoberPod Home Video's Bedtime Stories for Halloween, narrated by Edward October. Find OctoberPod on the World Wide Web at octoberpodvhs.com. OctoberPod, retro horror for bold individualists. Pull the strings!